In this lecture, we are going to add a callback function for rendering the block. Currently, I'm viewing the experimental page on the front end. The page is not rendering the search form block. This is because we didn't add a save function to our block. If you were to copy the block's content, an HTML comment would be saved in your clipboard. As we discussed before, the comment will act as a placeholder. WordPress will search for a function responsible for rendering the block's content. If a function is not available, nothing is rendered on the page. The next step becomes apparent. We should define a function for rendering the block's content. Let's get started. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the register block type functions parameter list. The register block type function has a second parameter, which is optional. It's an array of options for our block. The documentation for this function does not provide a list of options. According to the description of the second parameter, we can view a complete list of options by viewing the documentation page for the WP block type construct method. Let's check it out. Behind the scenes, the register block type function is calling this function to register our block. If we scroll to the parameters section, they'll be similar to the register block type function. The first parameter is the name of our block. The second parameter is an array of options. Compared to the previous page, this page will provide a comprehensive list of options with descriptions. You may notice something about these options. They're similar to the options for the block.json file or register block type JavaScript function. WordPress provides an alternative solution for adding block options through PHP. Seems redundant, but WordPress provides ultimate flexibility with adding options to a block. Keep in mind, not all options are the same between each solution. For blocks that are rendered on the server, there's an option exclusive to the PHP version of this function. Let's give it a try. In your editor, open the register blocks file. We are going to update the second argument of the register block type function from within the loop. However, we should add this argument on a per block basis. For example, the fancy header block does not need to add options. Rather than adding the options directly in the function, let's outsource them to our arrays. Inside the array for the search form block, add an index called options. Its value will be an array. Inside this array, we will store the options for the register block type function. A function can be added for rendering the block by adding an index called render callback. Throughout your career as a developer, you may hear the word callback. It's a common word in the programming world. A callback refers to a function that's called in the future. Currently, we're trying to register a block. We are not trying to render the block unless a page has the block within its contents. Therefore, it makes sense to have a callback. WordPress will handle calling the function at the right time. The value for this index must be the function's name. Let's set the name to the following: up search form render CB. In some cases, developers will shorten the word callback to CB. The next step is to add the options to the register block type function. However, we shouldn't assume the options array is available for all blocks. For example, the options array is not available in the fancy header block. We should check that the options array has been defined. There are two options for handling this scenario. The first option is to use a conditional statement. This solution is completely valid. However, it's a lot of code to write. PHP has support for a feature called the ternary operator. It's a shorthand syntax for writing a conditional statement. Let's give it a shot. Inside the register block type function, add a second argument with the following characters: question mark, colon. Adding these characters will create a ternary operator. To the left of the question mark, we must provide a condition. For the condition, let's use a function called isSet. The isSet function is defined by PHP. It'll check if an array has an index. In this case, we should check if the block array has an index called options. If it does, we can safely assume that we can provide the register block type function with the options. Between the question mark and colon symbols, we can provide a value if the condition is truthy. Here's the biggest difference between a traditional conditional statement and a ternary operator. A ternary operator will produce an expression. The value from the expression will be the value for the second argument of the register block type function. For this example, let's pass on the block options array. Lastly, we must provide a value if the condition is false. A value for a false condition can be added to the right of the colon symbol. Let's add an empty array. The code we've written is the equivalent of the conditional statement from the previous code snippet. The ternary operator is a great way to create a value based on a condition. It's not useful for writing blocks of code with multiple lines. If this line of code was any longer, we should resort to a traditional conditional statement. There are developers who don't like ternary operators because they can be difficult to read. If this syntax is difficult to read, you're more than welcome to switch to a traditional conditional statement. Overall, we are checking if the options array exists. If it does, we are passing it into the function. Otherwise, an empty array is provided to the function, which is the equivalent of not passing in anything. The next step is to define this function. Inside the includes directory, create a folder called blocks. We are going to dedicate a directory for rendering blocks with PHP. Inside this directory, create a file called searchform.php. Next, define the upSearchFormRenderCB. Inside this function, we must return content for the block. To keep things simple, let's return a string with a basic message. The actual HTML will be returned in another lecture. The next step is to include this file. At the moment, WordPress won't be able to find this function. We can include this file from the index.php file. Under the include section, run the include function with the following path: includes/blocks/searchform.php. We're finished. Defining a function for rendering a block is as simple as adding the render callback option to a block's options. Let's try refreshing the front end. After a few moments, the string returned by our function will be displayed on the front end. We've successfully created a block with server-side rendering. In the next lecture, we will replace this string with the real template for the block.